Okay, we are recording now. And I'm also going to start with a land acknowledgement. And this land acknowledgement comes from Adrian Wong from the Spiderweb Show in Ontario. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking that we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art that we make leaves significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous people worldwide. I invite you to join me in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time and for each other to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. And I will share a little bit more about the importance of a land acknowledgement in the chat. And now I'm going to turn the time over to our presenters.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jessica Litt, and I'm the Director of Business Affairs at the Dramatists Guild. Today, I am joined by my amazing panelists, Maura Harris and TJ Young. They're both co-representatives for the Guild in Pittsburgh. And today we're going to be talking about the Dramatists Guild's new Educator FAQ. So I want to give you a little bit of background on the Dramatists Guild, and then we'll give you a little background about the genesis of the document, and then we'll get right into it. So the Dramatists Guild of America is the national professional membership trade association of theater writers, including playwrights, composers, and lyricists. And we were established for the purpose of aiding dramatists in protecting the artistic and economic integrity of their work. So one thing you should be aware of is that we're a guild, not a union. And so we cannot collectively bargain because dramatists are considered independent contractors as opposed to employees. So what we do a lot of the time, because we can't legally represent our members, is we create advocacy documents. And we're out in the field advocating for the rights of dramatists 24/7, basically. And so this new document that we just launched this year called the Educator FAQ, Can I Do That? Was brought out of our education committee. Our education committee really said infringement is happening in schools with educators, including theater educators, all the time because there is confusion about the educational element. When is a license required? When is it not required? Is it fair use if it's in an educational setting? And so what they did is they went to the community and they started crowdsourcing a bunch of frequently asked questions that theater educators or just educators in general have when they're using copyrighted material, specifically plays, musicals, monologue, songs of that nature in their classrooms. And we started to just put together a document answering these questions in a really simple way so that when you have a question about, do I need a license for that? Do I need to ask for permission for that? You can just look to this document and it should answer pretty much all the basic questions that you have. What's really great is that I'm the person who wrote this document and I am an attorney, and there are things I learned while writing this document. So I want to reinforce the notion here that we're not telling you that you did something bad, even though we're telling you that you may have committed copyright infringement, because at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. I was a theater person before I became a lawyer. I was an actor. I went to college. We never talked about copyright. We never talked about, like, do I need to get licenses for stuff? I made a lot of mistakes. It wasn't until I went to law school and was like, oh, wow, I was doing a lot of bad things back then, that I was like, oh, it's now my job that I have this knowledge to help impart it on others so they don't make the same mistakes I did. So some of the things we're going to be talking about today is just copyright generally. It protects original works of authorship. And there's a bundle of rights associated when you have a copyright: the right to reproduce, the right to distribute, the right for public display, the right for public performance, and the right to create derivative works. And so the Educator FAQ kind of touches on all those bundle of rights. We're going to talk about fair use. We're going to talk about the Teach Act. The Teach Act is a part of the copyright statute, and it's basically an exemption under copyright law that allows for performance or display of any copyrighted material for in-person learning as long as certain factors are met. It also has a separate component where it's talking about distance learning, which became really prominent, obviously, in the COVID era. So I don't want to bore you with all the technical stuff right this second. So we're going to get into our discussion and start talking to our panelists. We're going to talk to all of you. So Maura, TJ, can you introduce yourself and your experience both as a dramatist and an educator? And we can start with Maura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maura V. Harris. I use she, her, hers. And I'm a playwright. I write a lot in the Theater for Young Audiences space. I have some scripts published through Play Scripts, Space Girl, Mercala, as well as a couple anthologies of 10 minutes. So I love having my plays in the classroom, and then I also teach playwriting in the classroom. I've taught at a bunch of different levels, but currently I teach middle school literary arts at Kappa, which is our like public performing arts magnet here in Pittsburgh.
TJ?
Yes, hello, my name is TJ Young. I use the he, suite of pronouns. I am a playwright originally from Texas, moved here to Pittsburgh in 2017, co-representative of the Pittsburgh region with Maura. I have scripts published with Script Partners and Concord Theatrics. Yeah, currently I teach at Carnegie Mellon University, where I'm an associate professor of dramaturgy as well. I've also taught playwriting at the middle school, college, and high school level as teaching artist for organizations through education departments with regional theaters and the like. So I'm excited to be here.
Thank you both. Okay, and so before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of like legal details, talk to me about your experience with copyright generally, especially as dramatists and dramatist educators. Why is copyright important to you? We'll start with TJ since you started with more last time.
Yeah, I think that for me, it took me a while to understand how to actually copyright my material. You know, for the longest time I grew up and they're like, mail it to yourself and that will count, you know, and all that good stuff. And really, the more I got my work out there, especially with utilizing the new Play Exchange and understanding that like I have proprietary rights to my work unless it's published somewhere else and I'm giving them the rights to distribute that work, it became really kind of it became kind of daunting to try to figure out like, how do I keep track of everything, right? How do I know if people are actually paying me for my work? How do I know when someone's using my script for a reading or anything like that, right? And I've had a couple instances where I didn't find out about a reading until after it has happened because, you know, a Google alert went off or something like that, right? And at that point, I have no real repercussion because I was like, the thing is done, and I could say like, you need to pay me, and then they have no reason to pay me, you know? So that has been one of the things that I've experienced, and also being able to tell young writers like, hey, you have a right to get paid for your work, you have ownership over it, and that's what this looks like. It's kind of it's where I fall. Yeah.
I want to dispel something really quickly for you, TJ. That you said that is that if you do find out that your work has been performed without your knowledge, you can reach out. Obviously, you may not want to go the nuclear route, as I call it, where you say, I'm going to sue you for copyright infringement. But a lot of times, like we're talking about now, it's a moment for education to say, hey, I just heard that you did this, but like, technically you needed to ask me for a license to do that. So in the future, I would ask that you do that. And most of the time when I've talked to people who've done things wrong, they're just like, oh, I didn't know. Now I'll do better. So do that.
Yeah, I've done that. As far as like, can I have my $50? They're like,
that's harder. Yeah. And you don't want to sue for $50. That's a lot. That's a lot of nonsense for no reason. Yeah. Okay, Maura, tell me why copyright is important to you.
I'm gonna, agree with everything TJ said. And like at a basic level as a playwright, copyright allows me to get, paid for the work I do, which, as a person whose other job is teaching in the public schools, like is important to me that I get paid. I think that as a teacher, it's really become a way of talking about like having pride in your work and advocating for yourself, right? Just like demonstrating to students that they, have control over this thing that they've created, which I think is like, even if they never go on to do playwriting, is a really important lesson. So I use copyright in like the practical way so that I can get paid, but also like as a way of teaching about being a creator of anything.
And I think this is a great opportunity to talk a little bit about what copyright is. So copyright is a form of intellectual property that protects original works of authorship. It doesn't protect concepts or ideas. It protects the actual expression of those ideas that you put on a screen, you put on a page. And copyright attaches the moment that something is fixed, meaning it's written down, it's typed. Copyright for dramatists is really unique in that dramatists own the copyright in the work that they create. This is in contrast to their film and television writer counterparts, where they usually sell the copyright in the work that they write to the studios. Dramatists don't do that. That's why we're a guild, not a union, because you're independent contractors, you own your work. Each work that you create is basically a new business, a new commodity that you're selling. And so that's why copyright is so important when we're talking about using theater materials in the classroom, or just generally, but here we're talking about specifically in the classroom. So now that we have that little background, I'm really happy we have an idea of why copyright is important. Let's start getting into it. And this is for everyone. Raise your hand if you've ever had the following experiences as an educator. You can raise your hand virtually or just raise your hand in there. You have taught an unpublished text. You have invited members outside of the class to an in-class presentation. You have invited parents, friends, and family to an in-class presentation. Yeah. You presented work from a classroom virtually. This is a newer thing now with COVID, but it's happening more frequently. You have mounted a full production at your school. You've been in charge of that. Yeah. You have sent students to competition where they need to perform copyrighted material. Yeah. You have had students and or faculty that want to make edits or cuts to works they are performing either in the classroom, competition, or production setting. You have used music in an in-class presentation or full production at your institution. So all of these scenarios that I just mentioned, that basically someone has raised their hand for all of these scenarios, they intersect with copyright law. And if you didn't know that, you're not alone. This is why we created the Educator FAQ, so that when you are doing any of these scenarios, you know how to do it properly while respecting the playwright, and also bringing that knowledge of how to respect the playwright, how to get the proper license to your students. So when they enter the world, they know what's going on. And now more on TJ, this is a question for you. So in your unique position as dramatist educators, where you think about your own copyrights all the time, how do you think about and approach copyright in the classroom with your students? Whoever wants to go for it first.
I mean, I think I'm sort of, as a playwright, I'm like uniquely aware that there are all of these like cool playwrights hanging around, dying to like know what's happening when I'm using their play in my classroom. Not for like any like selfish reasons to get paid or whatever, but because it's like a wonderful thing to know that your work is being appreciated in that way. So when I use other writers' materials in the room, I like to let them like know how it went, as well as that I'm doing it, right? Like, oh, like this was really funny and it was like the perfect play for this. Like, thank you for sending it my way. I was having such a hard time finding something. Like when I get emails like that, it makes me so happy. And my response is never like, you owe me $50 for photocopying that, right? I've never had anyone respond to me that way about it. So that's one end of it. And then the other end is like presenting works to students, along with like who the person was that wrote it. Usually I've selected a work because of who wrote it in some ways, right? I used the play Aliens versus Cheerleaders by Qui Gwyn with my 7th grade class, mostly to just show them that this can be really fun. And I do a little like slideshow, like this is Qui Gwyn, this is what nerd theater is, right? Here is, you know, an Asian man, which I am not, that is also doing this thing, right? So I think it's really like productive as a teacher to bring the person who wrote the thing into the space, right? Beyond just saying like, oh, you have to write a bibliography, you know?
Yeah, I think that also gives your students the idea there's a real person attached to this work, and you know, like it's their baby, and so they have the right to know when it's being performed, they have the right to know when it's being used, they have the right to get paid in the future if you're not paying them for the classroom use, but that's the deal that you would negotiate with that particular dramatist. But you know, I think we're in an internet age where like you can find anything online, and I know that Gen Z loves everything to be free, and so they want to put everything online, and I get it. You know, we want access to things, but when you just see like a text online, you don't think about the person that created it, and you don't think about like, if I take this offline or I take this from somewhere, then I might be taking money out of their pockets or something like that. So I like that you bring them into the classroom. That's awesome.
Yeah, for me, it's twofold. One is I work at Carnegie Mellon University, which is obviously like a institution that trains individuals to go into the industry. And so interacting with copyright is necessary for them to know what they're doing when they get a job and they're not making fools of themselves, right? Where they say, I've had dramaturgs who are saying like, hey, we really want to do this new work. We're concerned about like this phrase and we think that we could just like write it this way. And I'm like, or you could actually engage the playwright who's still alive in a conversation about like, hey, this is what we're bumping up against. What do you suggest? And so teaching them how to be collaborative in that way. In the same way, I use a lot of new work and work off a new play exchange in my coursework. And I reach out to every playwright, even if it's just like, hey, your play is going to be on a list that they could potentially choose to do a project on. Is that okay with you? And, 9 times out of 10, they're like, yeah. Sometimes they're like, you know what, that's a draft that I have up there that I'm not really like wanting people to like experiences like my work, So being able to say, and then those students go around and say, oh, we'd love to do this for like auditions. I'm like, good thing the playwright's email is there. So like, let them
Yeah.
know. Engaging them with the business side of it and also the collaborative side of it as well. Because the thing that we run into is always the thing I always run into is like, why can't we just, and I'm like, well, here's a list of reasons why we can't just change it. And if you are requesting an edit or an alteration to the script, here's the process to go about that in a way that's legal and sound, and still respects the art.
I like that you brought up New Play Exchange. A lot of the questions that I get are like, oh, or a lot of the issues that I hear that come up a lot of the time is that people use New Play Exchange and they pay for the service and they access the play and then they perform it. And they don't realize that the payment that they're making to New Play Exchange to access the work is not the same as a performance license. And so if you are a playwright and you're on this meeting with us today, make sure you have some sort of notice on the front of your page or in front of your script that says, if you want to perform my work, please contact me at the contact information here. Because New Play Exchange, it's a great way to find new work, but it also can be ripe for piracy just because sometimes it's just not clear what you're paying for when you use it. So let's get more into specifics. Before we do that, when reading the Educator FAQ for the first time, what surprised you the most and why? Maura?
I think I was just like, oh, people should be reaching out to me more. I didn't realize. Yeah, particularly with just the sort of like casual classroom use, right? Like that's always something that I thought, oh, it's so nice if somebody tells me about, but I didn't realize like they know they're actually supposed to tell you. So that was something new that I learned with this one.
Great. And TJ?
Photocopies. Oh, photocopies. Like, when I was doing theater in high school and even in undergrad and stuff like that, they would just hand you copies of scripts for classwork all the time. And it's like, oh no, you should be, because they're like, oh, we have it in our theater library, so we bought it once. It's fine. But if you hand me the whole script, that's like the percentage of being like, if it's this much or if it's this number of words, that's okay. All that stuff was really super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and that's something actually we've been talking a lot about in our business affairs department at the Guild, is putting language in our licensing agreements about photocopies of scripts, because obviously you're writing new work. It's not like you're buying acting editions from Concord Theatricals or something like that. What do you do? How many scripts am I allowed to print? What do I do with the scripts when they're done? Do the actors get to keep them? Do I have to destroy them? And so that's something that you don't often think about, because we're also online. So people are using iPads, they're using their computers, but like when you're on stage, you need a script in your hand most of the time. And how do you get that? How do you get that to happen? And realizing that the right to copy work is an exclusive right of the copyright holder. And so you can't just copy things willy-nilly. Like you're not going to go to the bookstore and make copies of To Kill a Mockingbird. You're just not going to do that. So you shouldn't be doing that with new plays that you find as well. Okay, so in your experience as educators, have you ever taught at an institution where there were explicit policies regarding the use of copyrighted materials? You don't have to name them. I don't want to put anyone on blast, but because like a lot of times, like I recently reached out to a university who one of our members reached out to us and said, I found out that they used my scene in a directing showcase. And I was invited to it, and that's how I found out about it. But they never asked me permission to put it in a directing showcase. And then I reached out to the department, and they were like, "Oh, we have no policies about this." And so I sent them the Educator FAQ, and they were like, "We just distributed it to our entire staff, and we're going to start implementing these policies into how we do things moving forward." So, have you ever experienced that in your own institutions that you've worked for?
I'm throwing a hissy fit, so we're slowly implementing it. So, but I have worked at a few institutions where there just were it was like very carte blanche, like sort of hands off sort of thing. Yeah.
And Maura?
Yeah, I think almost everywhere I've worked has had some sort of honor code, like an anti-plagiarism type thing that is mostly associated with like written works. And I honestly don't know how they applied it to works that were being performed there. Right. I think that's a little bit harder to police or check, right? Because you can't, run it through a cheating catcher. Yeah, but so I think that's an interesting question for those schools. For sure.
Yeah, because honor code, it just means that they're assuming that you understand what you're supposed to do. And it's on the institution, because if someone's gonna sue the educator, they're really also suing like the institution itself. So it's on them to put policies in place and educate their staff about how to acquire licensing the right way, how to approach copyright the right way. So good on you, TJ, for making a hissy fit and starting to implement those policies. And I love that it's just an honor code. That you can't be an honor code if you don't know what you're doing is wrong. So I'm going to go back to what TJ was talking about before. You've obviously both taught texts that were not published. And how do you go about distributing the text to the rest of the class?
Yeah, so I do, we have an online learning system that put a PDF there, and then I make the PDF available to where they can't download it. They have to, so I have them bring their laptops to class, and then I take it down when it's done, right? The thing is, a lot of the plays I get are from New Play Exchange, and so I say, if you really want this play, you do have the ability to download it from New Play Exchange. So like go do that from their
Mm.
page. That's just me also being like, go look at New Play Exchange and don't be lazy. But yeah, I take down the plays after we read them every time. Yeah.
Great. And Maura, how about you?
Yeah, I am working with a younger group right now, so I'm not having them make New Play Exchange accounts at this point in their lives. But what I have done is either, made copies and collected them at the end of the class, right? Like half to save paper and half so it's not floating around in the world. And then another thing I've done is just used, like, a lot of publishing websites have like a free reads type thing. I know PlayScripts does, where you can, give them your email and you have the script and can read it, for the period we're in class. It takes like a little bit of time at the outset, like to get everybody going on there.
Yeah.
But that's been a really great resource for me too, because that's something I know the playwright has already agreed to happening with their script.
That makes sense. So I want to let all of our group know that our FAQ includes a summary of this document called Agreement on Guidelines for Classroom Copying in Non-for-Profit Educational Institutions with Respect to Books and Periodicals. Yes, that is the actual name of the document. It was promulgated by the Authors Coalition, of which the Dramatists Guild is part. And it sets minimum standards for distributing copies in a classroom setting. There's like certain things that you need to be aware of. Like, like news articles are generally allowed because it's spontaneous. But one thing I want to note from these guidelines and highlight is that you cannot copy a full script or a score to share with your classroom without having permission from that copyright holder. So if you want to distribute copies to the class, then the proper way to go about it generally is to reach out to the copyright owner and say, hey, I want to teach this text to my class. I would like to distribute physical copies. Here's the number of students in my class. How much would a license be for me to be able to do that? And you kind of want to set, the dramatists may set boundaries with you. They may say, we want you to destroy these afterwards. We may want you to collect these afterwards. We may want you to, after you print them, mail them back to me. But because it's kind of like, there's no specific way to license unpublished work in terms of distributing photocopies, the best thing to do, and I think that's kind of like the theme of today, is to talk to the dramatist if it's an unpublished work and say, I want to distribute copies. I want to make sure I'm respecting you and your work. How can we do this in a way that's compensating you and also respecting you at the same time? So that's one thing that you should be aware of. I see a question in the chat and I want to address it since we have a nice little group today. How do you make it so they can't download it? Are you speaking specifically about New Play Exchange, Hunter?
Yeah, to his point about he would make it so his students could read it but not download it. Are those all from Nuke's Play Exchange? Or I didn't.
Yeah, so I've gotten them from New Play Exchange, and then I actually, I have my like campus Google Drive or whatever. So instead of uploading the PDF, I upload a protected URL from Google Drive that really can do with the PDF, and that's how I stop them from being able to download it.
I love these tips and tricks. That's brilliant. Okay, so I know that you are primarily teaching playwriting, you're teaching dramaturgy, but and we can take this to the group as well. If you've ever taught like an acting or a directing class, when you are selecting scenes for presentations where an audience will be invited, have you ever inquired about rights? Have you ever acquired the rights? Do you know how? Do you know what the process looks like? If anyone has anything they'd like to share as part of this conversation, please feel free. And if not, I'll just get into the rules about doing that sort of thing.
For the larger musicals and things that we've done, like with I believe it's MTI. I feel like that's pretty clear and easy to obtain rights to. I think it gets like some of the things I had questions about as you were discussing was like teachers pay teachers, right? So if I purchase something off teachers pay teachers, is that something that I can use? Is by purchasing it, giving it permission, or do I need to take a step further and write the playwright or the author of the work? Especially for like distributing copies, because obviously I'm going to use it in my classroom. I'm probably going to need more than one copy unless I'm posting it on a projector or something like that. Does that make sense?
I don't know that website, but if it's similar to like what New Play Exchange is, when you're accessing and paying for an account on New Play Exchange, you're paying to access the work that's there. You're not paying to make copies of that work or distribute that work or perform that work. And so I would imagine it's probably a similar situation on that website. And so if you do intend to use any of the work that you are accessing through New Play Exchange or something similar, then you want to get a license for that work. Now, there are only specific instances where a license is required. So if you're teaching an acting class, if you're teaching a directing class, and there's a showcase at the end, because they've been working on scenes, they're going to perform these scenes. If the showcase is only for members of that class, then a license is not required. If you are inviting parents, if you're inviting friends, family, if you're inviting other members of the school, then a license is required. Basically, once an audience comes into the picture, whether or not there's admission being charged, whether or not it's just students who are in a different acting class, that's when a license is required under copyright law. And so what you want to do, even if you have access to that script through New Play Exchange or what have you, is you reach out to that particular dramatist and you say, hey, we want to use this scene from your play in our directing showcase. Would you give me a license for that? And generally, like Maura and TJ are saying, they're so excited that their work is being taught in a classroom setting. They're so excited that their work is getting exposure, but they're still business people and they'd like to get paid. So they may not charge a lot. They may not charge you at all, but just the act of saying, I know that I need a license for this because I'm going to invite an audience to these scenes, is a sign of respect and it's complying with copyright law. And so always, always, always ask. Now, we're talking a lot about unpublished work. Now, if you're licensing from a big licensing house like MTI, like Concord, like Broadway licensing, you're still going to have to ask for a license for them, even for scenes that you're performing before an audience. They're probably going to have it's going to be more formalized in terms of acquiring the rights for something like that, obviously, than when you're just working with a playwright who's negotiating on their own. But nonetheless, even if it's from a big licensing house, you still have to get permission to do that because they are the licensing agent for that particular dramatist play. So if there's ever an audience, that's the key word. Audience does not include members of the class because they're not an audience. They're going to be there already. So if anyone outside the class is coming to see it, then you know that you have to acquire the rights to do that.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I'm so glad. Here's a good question. What do you say to a student, Maura or TJ, if they want to live stream the work or record it to be presented virtually?
I hope you have a license to do that. Especially with because of COVID, a lot of publishing houses and a lot of playwrights have already come in contact with streaming rights as part of the licensing agreement, right? Just including it and being upfront about what you want is the way to go about it. Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add, Maura?
That scenario has not come up for me.
No worries. No worries.
I would add, just in case people are listening to this and going oh God, I've really screwed up. I've gotten not a lot, but some whoops emails from teachers like, oh, we already did this and I found out after the fact I should have reached out to you. And like, I'm never mad about it. I was like, thank you so much for letting me know. Like, obviously it's better if you can reach out to someone in advance, but if you're like feeling panic right now, like shoot them an email now.
I want to reiterate to everyone here that this isn't a condemnation of your past actions. Like I said at the beginning, what you don't know, you don't know. And we as theater people, we're not often thinking about the business of things. We're thinking about craft, especially like in an educational setting. So you're not a bad person if you did things wrong. You just didn't know. And so that's why we're here. That's why we created this document, so that you know better in the future and you can educate your fellow educators so they can do better in the future. We understand that copyright law is confusing. It can be nuanced. There's confusion about dramatists versus film and television writers. And so it's okay. It's okay if you make mistakes. The best thing to do is when you make a mistake and realize you made that mistake is own it, like sending those emails that Maura gets. So please know that we're not condemning you for making any mistakes here. But I want to talk a little bit about live streaming the work and presenting it virtually. So again, like TJ said, if a work is being presented virtually, if it's just scenes from a class, I mean, if it's being presented virtually, then obviously an audience outside of the classroom is going to see it. And so you do need a license for that. One thing you'll want to know is that you're generally, it's going to be hard to get a license to like post something on YouTube or a site that anyone can access, because when things are posted on YouTube, they live there forever. And that makes it ripe for online piracy. So maybe if you don't want something to go on to a website that's not like password protected, that doesn't have a secure platform. And so those are the things that you're going to be talking about with that playwright if you are asking for permission to present their work virtually. But yeah, so like posting things on like any open share sites, that's generally a no-no, and generally a playwright is not going to agree to do something like that, just because then it lives out there forever. And they don't want that, because anyone can access it at any time without contacting them. Okay, so keep going through these questions. What do you say to a student when they want to make cuts to a work in a classroom setting?
Don't. And honestly, that's the one I run up against the most. I'll have students who pitch a play for the season. They get approved for that play for the season. They get rights to that play for the season. And then they say, hey, we want to make these cuts. And I'm like, no. Yeah, that's it's really a conversation about like, you should have been able to articulate what your needs were for the script before you requested rights, because those cuts should be requested at the time that you ask for rights.
That's exactly correct. So let me just highlight this. So as copyright owners, you own your entire work. And that means that no one can make changes to your work without your prior written permission. And that includes the title, that includes casting, particular genders that you want to assign to characters, settings, stage directions. All of those things cannot be cut, changed, whatever, until you have permission from the playwright. But that is only if it's part of a performance where an audience is invited, a competition, a production. But if it's solely within the classroom, if you are teaching a play in a classroom to your students, you can make cuts without permission. I will tell you that. But it's only if you're teaching it, it's only within the classroom. Again, no one outside. If you're presenting the work, as in producing the work, you can't make cuts without permission. But if it's just like, I don't want to teach these particular words or something like that while you're in a classroom setting, you can make cuts. But the Dramatists Guild will encourage you to teach the text as written, because that is what the playwright intended. They don't want you to make cuts to your work. And so if you're planning to teach a work, you should probably teach the whole work and not what you think the work should be. But under copyright law, at least, in just a pure classroom setting, cuts can be made. But at the minute it becomes a production of some sort or a presentation of some sort, cuts require prior written permission. And I want to highlight what TJ said. When you are asking for licensing rights, especially if you're talking to licensing houses, ask for those cuts ahead of time, because they have to go to the playwright and get permission from the playwright. And a lot of times playwrights will provide like previously approved cuts to the licensing houses that they've licensed their plays to. So ask about that. There's a lot of, I don't want to get too much into like censorship happening in the world right now, but talking about how play isn't family friendly or something like that. Licensing houses, for example, will have family friendly editions. They will also have previously approved cuts from dramatists to make a show less vulgar, so to speak. And so always ask for permission when you're asking for the rights, because you don't want to get to a situation, especially like a competition, where you realize you need to make a cut for time or something like that. And the competition's in 2 days, and now you need to ask permission to get that cut for time. And so ask way ahead of time. You want to make sure you get that way ahead of time. Okay. I know Maura may not have something about this, but anyone in the room can talk about this. When using music in in-class presentations or productions, do you ever acquire rights? Yeah, so music is a really weird thing under copyright law. When you are using music in a dramatic fashion, you are either acquiring the small rights or the grand rights. Grand rights are when it's move a story forward. So if you have a song that someone's going to sing as a part of a show, you're probably going to need the grand rights. And if you want the grand rights, then you have to actually approach the songwriters themselves in order to get the permission to use that song. But if it's a song in the background or like pre-show music or post-show music, what you want is something called small rights. And small rights are what you acquire from BMI, ASCAP, CSAC, those performing rights organizations. And a lot of times your institutions may already have blanket licenses with these PROs, because they're playing music like in the hallways, in the cafeteria, and that's small rights. So if you hear music at a bar, if you hear music at anywhere you go, like at a grocery store, they have a small rights license in order to hear that music that you're playing in the background. But the minute the music is being used to tell the story, then that's when you need grand rights, and that's when you have to approach the actual songwriters. And that can be difficult to do because grand rights are highly negotiated. There's no like set rate, whereas small rights, there are set rates, but because you're probably using them in a smaller setting, it's not going to be as expensive as acquiring grand rights for a Broadway show. So I will tell you at least that much. And Maura and TJ, after reviewing the FAQ, what challenges do you foresee trying to implement these principles in the future?
The onset of being able to Google insert name of script and PDF and being able to find it just makes things vastly more difficult. I can tell a student like, hey, I need you to buy the script for class.
Yeah.
And there's still going to be the people who go out and, get the PDF. And it's also hard to verify because a lot of the scripts are digitally distributed through Barnes & Noble or Amazon or any of those other places. I mean, you can even get Concord. Concord has digital scripts and stuff now too. So that's the hardest thing, is making sure that people are even if I assign a published script for class, and I'm saying you need to buy it because we're going to be using it in this way. I can't often double and triple check the way that they're acquiring it.
Yeah, makes sense. Maura, what challenges do you foresee?
I think like one of the biggest challenge always with playwrights, like trying to, be in various rooms where their plays are, is that it is more work. It's way more rewarding to connect with the person who wrote the thing. But like I've been there too, where it's like, oh my God, my contract hours are almost up and I have to send like 3 more emails to parents. And like now I have to email this playwright. I can totally see that just being like feeling like another thing on your to-do list. But I also like I've had such a good time like coming in to classrooms in whatever small ways like I can work out with the teacher, and I think like it's always proven to have been a good thing. And it's also just like the right thing to do. So if the right thing takes more work, you kind of still have to do it.
Great. I'm going to take questions in a minute, Sandy, but just before we do that, what do you think the most important takeaway for our attendees is today? Either one of you can start, whichever has the spirit movie first.
Most important takeaway is if there's an audience at all, you need rights, right? If there's an audience at all, if you need rights, I've heard before that I'm not charging, therefore I don't need to acquire rights. It's like, no, you do. That's the biggest takeaway, at least in my eyes.
Maura?
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, like you're also very likely helping to like pay another teacher's bills when you reach out to them about rights to their plays. So many of us are also educators and in the same boat. So if that helps motivate you a little bit, I think it does to me. So.
Thank you. I want to thank you both for your insight today, because I come from an acting background and then an attorney background. So to have an educator dramatist background, it's to hear your voices is really important in this conversation. So now we're going to have some time for some questions. So we'll start with Sandy because your hand was raised first.
Okay, thank you. As a playwright, I want to go back to the music issue. As a playwright, I have been told that if I specify that a character sing a particular copyrighted piece, such as Joe sings "I Left My Heart in San Francisco," then it's my job to acquire those rights and be able to offer them with my script. But if I only specify a type of music, Joe sings a classic, something like "I Left My Heart in San Francisco," then it's the producer's job to choose something and get rights to use it. Am I correct about that?
Close. So if you're including a song in your work, and it's specific, the good thing is you're not putting the actual lyrics. Don't put the actual lyrics, because then you're going to have to get permission to reprint those lyrics into your script. So yeah, if you want a specific song sung, then what you would do is say they sing "I Left My Heart in San Francisco" here. But in terms of acquiring the rights, no, unless you're self-producing. The producer is going to need to acquire the rights for the song to be sung in that production, because you're acquiring rights on a production basis. Because if you go to the songwriter and be like, I just need to acquire the rights, well, for what? And you're not putting anything that, because like song titles aren't copyrightable. So if you're putting the song title in your script, you don't need permission for the song title to be there. But once the production happens, that's when you need permission for the song to actually be sung. Now, what we do tell members is that if you are going to include a song and you want to be specific, at least inquire if the rights are available. You're not asking to actually get those rights, but you want to make sure that they're available before you put them in a script, because like we're talking about, producers have an obligation to produce scripts as written. And so if they get your script and then they realize they can't acquire the rights for that song, or the song rights are abysmally expensive, they may not decide to produce your script. And so that is why there's that alternative to say, here, a song like this is sung or a song like this plays, because that gives the producer a little bit more latitude in acquiring rights and the payment for those rights. Laura, you had a question?
Yes. So I don't know if this throws a wrench into this, but having worked as a teaching artist at public and also private schools, I'm wondering how this is affected if I'm teaching at a private institution that is not a non-for-profit.
It doesn't matter, to be honest with you. If you're teaching the work in an educational setting, copyright law applies to you. If you're teaching the work, if you're using the work in any way, shape, or form, copyright applies. Obviously, the non-for-profit, that's like the name of that particular document that came out, but those principles would still apply in a private institution. So yeah, you'd still want to make sure that you're acquiring the rights, especially if like audiences are invited, like TJ's takeaway. You want to have appropriate rights acquired for something like that.
Oh, yeah, I was thinking more of like the fair use thing you'd mentioned, if you're doing like things just in the classroom. Because it's an educational setting, but technically it's not a not-for-profit.
In the classroom is different than when you bring it outside of the classroom, because there's like this gray area where it's like, it's still in the classroom because we're in the same classroom, physical room, doing these scenes, but we've invited an audience. But if you're just solely like teaching a class on dramaturgy and you're teaching this particular text, then there is more latitude in teaching that particular text as it relates to cuts and things like that, because there's no audience, essentially. It's not a performance, it's not a production. But you still have to acquire the appropriate rights to teach that in your class, as in like you need to make sure that you're acquiring a copy lawfully, as in like if you got the play on New Play Exchange, then you need to make sure that you have the right to distribute copies to your students.
Can I ask another one?
Yeah, of course.
So I this is just something that's been coming up a lot on the EDTA forum, which is that I know Play Scripts in particular recently changed their policy about once you buy the rights, you then have to buy a minimum number of scripts to go with it, even if you're not casting that many people in it.
That's interesting.
Based on the average they assume you would need to do it. So I'm wondering if that's strictly something they're doing because they want to sell more scripts, or it sort of opened up the question of also what happens if you've bought a set of scripts and the rights for it, and then 5 years later you decide to do that show again and you still have the set of scripts and you just want to buy the rights.
Great. Twofold. That practice by Play Scripts sounds just like a policy that Play Scripts is doing. It's not necessarily about copyright law. I mean, obviously you have to purchase the acting editions lawfully in order to do the show, but like having a minimum number that you have to purchase, that's Play Scripts. If you do a show and you purchase the rights and you purchase the acting editions, and then you decide to do the show 5 years later, generally, if it's still represented by the same licensing house, you are able to reuse those scripts. You just need to like let them know and show proof of purchase of those scripts in the past, but you will have to acquire new performance rights because it's a different set of performances. Do we have other questions? John.
One of the challenges with the music particularly is finding who has the rights to that music. Is there a clearinghouse? Is there a source? Is there a site? How do you begin that search to even find if the rights to a particular piece of music are available?
That's a great question. So music copyright has two copyrights. Any piece of music has two copyrights associated with it, or a recorded piece of music. There's a copyright in the sound recording itself, and then there's a copyright in the underlying composition. I'm going to speak primarily about the underlying composition because sound recordings one thing you should know about them is if you are going to use a sound recording in a public performance, you don't need a license from the owner of the sound recording for that public performance, but you do need a license from the person who owns the underlying composition. Ways to find those people: start at ASCAP, start at BMI, the people who represent the small rights for that particular song. If they don't, they should have like the publisher's contact information or the agent's contact information if you want to acquire grand rights, if the small rights that you'd acquire from ASCAP or BMI are not appropriate for your use. Start there. They're usually pretty helpful. Do we have any other questions, comments, feelings about what we've talked about today?
I have a question.
Yes, Wilfredo.
I'm sure, I think I know the answer to this already, but what about song lyrics? If you wanted to, for example, I'm thinking about like on TikTok, had an idea to like, hey, you have songs and like you can like using song lyrics to create your own story or sort of finding your story in songs that are already out there. So let me get more clear.
Okay.
Is using song lyrics on a public forum like TikTok, is that another, you need to go to a small rights person, or you need to go to a grand rights person, or because TikTok is sort of like everyone's sharing all the time, it's different? I'm curious about platforms like social media like that.
Social media is very complicated and challenging. As for TikTok, like if like a song is being used in TikTok, like usually TikTok should have a broad license with the rights holders of songs so that you can use their songs on your platform. Like that's why if like you have an Instagram business account, the songs available for you to put on your reels are limited as compared to having a regular Instagram account. But in terms of song lyrics, like if you're going to use them to create something new, that sounds to me like a derivative work. And so you are taking that copyright owner's work and creating something new out of it. Now, there might be an argument for fair use, and I can take this moment to talk about fair use. But we hear the word fair use all the time. Fair use is a defense to copyright infringement, meaning you have actually already infringed, but there is an excuse under copyright law that gets you out of that infringement. Courts use a 4-factor balancing test to determine whether a use is fair. There's not one particular factor that's dispositive. And so it's really say whether a court is going to find a use to be fair. So depending on how you're transforming the song lyrics, there might be a really strong argument for fair use. You'd want to talk to an attorney about that. But to me, it sounds like if you're taking the song lyrics to create something else, it's a derivative work. And if you're going to create a derivative of an underlying copyrighted material, then you need a license to do that. Now, the TikTok element is a whole different ballgame. TikTok is dealing with their own copyright infringement suits and dealing with how to navigate the copyright space. One thing I'll say, if you're a creator and you see your work on TikTok or with that, and you haven't granted permission for that to happen, or if you see it on YouTube, if you see it on Facebook, you can submit what's called a takedown request. Under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, all websites that host third-party content have to have procedures in place. So if you see copyright infringement, and they have to remove it promptly. So that's just something to be aware of there. I hope that answers your question. TikTok is a whole different beast that I don't really want to get too far into right now. Sandy, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understand something you just said to John a moment ago.
Sure.
If I'm producing a show and I want to play the Cleveland Symphony's recording of something in the public domain, Beethoven.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's in the public domain. I don't have to contact Beethoven, but do I have to contact Cleveland Symphony?
For the recording itself, no. However, even if the underlying composition is in the public domain, when it comes to classical music, the arrangement of that composition may not be.
Right.
Because arrangements are copyrightable. And I know I just added another layer to everything, but yeah, so that's tough. You want to find out if it's the original composition that they're doing or if it's a new arrangement by that particular symphony, and then you might need to acquire the underlying rights for that.
There are websites where they have performances in the public domain.
There you go.
Are those legitimate? That's okay to use those things?
I would take a look at like their terms of use and their terms and conditions just to be sure. I can't say with certainty that they're okay because I'd have to vet them all, but hopefully if they're using, compositions from like Bach, then
Yes.
you should be okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up today? Okay, well, then we will end here. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I really want to give a special shout out to Maura and TJ. Thank you so much for joining me to talk through this thorny bush of legal jargon. To have your perspective here makes it a little bit less daunting and makes everyone understand that they're not alone in navigating the legal world as an artist and an educator. So Jordan has put some amazing links into the chat. Please check them out. If you're a member of the Dramatists Guild, if you have questions about anything we talked about today, you can reach out to us at our help desk. And thank you again for coming, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. There's an eval link if you'd like it in the chat as well. Awesome presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a lot of information, and I was like going online and downloading all the things, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I'm really happy at the way that our team made the Educator FAQ because it's so clear. It took all like my writing and just made it way clearer than just looking at a Word document. So
yeah, I also really
amazing.
appreciated this format. It was great to have like, two different kind of educators and playwrights that you could then pose the questions to. That was a really cool format.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Happy moving.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.